In August 2022, a shocking incident in the small town of Sidwell, Montana, captured national attention when a seemingly routine car accident unveiled a disturbing case of familial betrayal. The incident occurred in this quiet community of approximately 5,800 residents, located in the southwestern region of Montana, about 45 miles east of Bozeman, where the economy primarily revolves around agriculture and a small but growing tourism sector. Susan Marshall, a 19-year-old sophomore at Sidwell Community College studying business administration, suffered a severe car accident on Pine Creek Road, a winding stretch of asphalt connecting the town's residential area to its commercial district. Marshall, driving a 2018 Toyota Camry, was en route to meet Sidwell County Sheriff James Carter, age 36, with whom she had been involved in a romantic relationship that had become the subject of significant local gossip and controversy within the tight-knit community. The initial investigation, conducted by the Montana Highway Patrol under the direction of Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, a veteran officer with 15 years of experience in traffic accident reconstruction, indicated that Marshall's vehicle had experienced a catastrophic brake failure. The car veered off the road at a sharp curve, known locally as Devil's Elbow, due to its challenging navigation, and collided with a large oak tree. The impact caused severe structural damage to the vehicle, particularly affecting the driver's side compartment where Susan was trapped. Emergency services responded promptly to the scene after receiving a 911 call from Sheriff Carter, who had been following Marshall's vehicle in his patrol car. The Sidwell Fire Department, led by Chief Michael Rodriguez, worked alongside Somerset County EMTs to extract Susan from the wreckage using hydraulic rescue tools. Susan was immediately transported to Sidwell Regional Medical Center, where Dr. Elena Petrov, the head of emergency trauma surgery, led the team treating her critical injuries. The case developed from a tragic accident into something far more sinister when the vehicle inspection was conducted by the Montana State Police Forensic Unit. Lead investigator Detective Jane Green, who had recently transferred from the Seattle Police Department's Major Crimes Division, discovered unmistakable evidence of tampering with the brake lines. The forensic examination revealed tool marks consistent with deliberate manipulation, transforming what initially appeared to be a tragic accident into an attempted murder investigation. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators identified Margaret Marshall, age 45, as the primary suspect. Margaret, who had lost her husband Robert Marshall to a heart attack 5 years earlier, worked as an administrative assistant at Sidwell Elementary School and was known in the community for her overprotective attitude toward her only daughter. The investigation revealed that Margaret had orchestrated the sabotage of her daughter's vehicle in what appeared to be a calculated attempt to end Susan's relationship with Sheriff Carter. The case file, designated number 2022-814-137, documented extensive evidence including security footage from the Marshall residence at 1247 Maple Street, showing Margaret's suspicious activity around the vehicle in the early morning hours of the incident. The footage was captured by cameras installed at the neighboring property of retired security consultant Frank Henderson, who had maintained a comprehensive home surveillance system. The Montana State Police assigned a special task force led by Captain David Whitman and the FBI's Helena Field Office, under Special Agent Victoria Reeves, joined the investigation due to the attempted murder charge and the involvement of a law enforcement officer as an indirect target. The investigation also brought to light the complex dynamics within Sidwell's social fabric, where the relationship between Susan Marshall and Sheriff Carter had become a source of division among residents. Some supported the age gap relationship between two consenting adults, while others, including prominent community members like Reverend Timothy Walsh of the First Baptist Church, had publicly expressed concerns about the appropriateness of such a relationship involving the county's chief law enforcement officer. The small town of Sidwell, Montana, had long known Sheriff James Carter as a pillar of the local community. With over a decade of service in law enforcement, Carter had built a reputation for integrity and professionalism that extended far beyond his official duties. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with a muscular build developed through years of physical training and outdoor work, he cut an imposing figure that commanded respect from both colleagues and civilians. James Carter's law enforcement career began shortly after graduating from the Montana State University's Criminal Justice Program. He joined the Sidwell County Sheriff's Department at age 26, quickly rising through the ranks due to his exceptional investigative skills and commitment to community service. By 2022, He had become the longest-serving sheriff in the county's recent history, with a record of solving complex cases and maintaining low crime rates in the region. Margaret Marshall's life took a dramatically different trajectory. Widowed at 40 when her husband Robert died of a sudden heart attack, she was left to raise their only daughter, Susan, alone. Robert had been a well-respected local auto mechanic, and his unexpected death 5 years earlier had left Margaret both emotionally and financially vulnerable. She turned to her administrative job at Sidwell Elementary School to support herself and her daughter, developing an intensely protective approach to parenting in the wake of her loss. The relationship between Susan and James Carter began in May 2022, initially as a casual interaction during a routine traffic stop. Susan, then 19 and a sophomore at Sidwell Community College, was pulled over for a minor traffic violation. What started as a standard encounter gradually developed into a more personal connection. Carter, who had never been married and had few long-term relationships, found himself drawn to Susan's intelligence and vibrant personality. According to witness statements and personal interviews, the relationship became romantic by late June 2022. The 17-year age difference became a source of intense controversy within the small community. Margaret Marshall was particularly vocal about her opposition, expressing her concerns to multiple friends and family members. She viewed the relationship as an abuse of power, arguing that Carter's position as county sheriff created an inherent power imbalance. Recorded statements from Margaret's close friend, Eleanor Thompson, revealed the depth of her maternal anxiety. Margaret was convinced that James was manipulating Susan, Thompson told investigators. She believed he was taking advantage of a young, impressionable girl who didn't understand the complexities of relationships with someone in a position of authority. Susan, however, presented a starkly different narrative. In conversations with her college friends and later during police interviews, she consistently maintained that her relationship with Carter was consensual and meaningful. She emphasized their shared intellectual connection and mutual respect, dismissing her mother's concerns as outdated and overprotective. The tension between Margaret and Susan reached its peak in early July 2022, when Margaret discovered explicit text messages and photographs confirming the romantic nature of Susan's relationship with Carter. This discovery triggered a series of heated arguments that gradually escalated the familial conflict. Local community members remained divided. Some supported Carter, pointing to his long-standing service and reputation. Others, particularly those with teenage daughters, shared Margaret's concerns about the significant age difference and potential power dynamics. The conflict between mother and daughter became increasingly public, with arguments overheard in local establishments like the Sidwell Diner and the community library. Susan's defiance and Margaret's persistent opposition created a pressure cooker of emotional tension that would ultimately lead to the dramatic events of August 14th. As investigators would later discover, Margaret's opposition to the relationship was not merely about age or power dynamics, but rooted in a complex web of personal fears, traumatic loss, and an overwhelming desire to protect her daughter from what she perceived as potential harm. Witness statements and extensive interviews revealed a pattern of increasingly erratic behavior from Margaret. She had confided in several close friends about her deep-seated concerns regarding Susan's relationship with Carter. Eleanor Thompson, her closest confidant, recalled multiple conversations where Margaret expressed her fears. She was convinced that Carter was destroying Susan's future, Thompson told investigators. Margaret believed he was manipulating her daughter, using his position of authority to take advantage of Susan's youth and inexperience. The investigation uncovered a critical connection between Margaret Marshall and Robert Miller, a 52-year-old local auto mechanic with a modest repair shop on the outskirts of Sidwell. Miller, a longtime acquaintance of the Marshall family, had known Margaret and her late husband Robert for over a decade. His initial involvement in the plot was seemingly innocuous, a request from Margaret to help her teach a lesson to Sheriff Carter. According to Miller's detailed statement to investigators, the initial plan was much more targeted. Margaret had originally proposed sabotaging Carter's patrol vehicle, hoping to create a scenario that would embarrass or potentially compromise his professional standing. Miller, however, was hesitant. As a respected mechanic with no prior criminal record, he understood the serious legal implications of tampering with a law enforcement vehicle. The plan evolved dramatically in the days leading up to August 14th. Margaret's focus shifted from targeting Carter directly to targeting Susan. believing that creating a dangerous situation for her daughter would ultimately force a separation from the sheriff. Miller's role became more complex. He would provide Margaret with the technical knowledge to compromise Susan's vehicle's brake system. Forensic evidence and Miller's testimony revealed the precise mechanics of the plan. Miller provided Margaret with specialized tools and guidance on how to cut and weaken the brake lines in a manner that would appear accidental. He claimed he believed Margaret's actions were merely a scared mother's desperate attempt to protect her daughter, not recognizing the potentially fatal consequences of his assistance. Robert Miller's involvement was motivated by a combination of factors. He had known the Marshall family for years and felt a sense of obligation to Margaret, who had been a widow struggling to raise her daughter alone. Additionally, he harbored long-standing resentment towards Sheriff Carter stemming from a previous legal dispute over a traffic violation that had cost Miller a significant contract with the county sheriff's department. Investigators discovered a series of encrypted text messages and phone records that documented the communication between Margaret and Miller in the weeks leading up to the incident. These communications revealed a carefully orchestrated plan, with Miller providing technical guidance and Margaret meticulously planning her approach. The conspiracy took its final shape in the early morning hours of August 14th. Margaret used her spare key to access Susan's vehicle, which was parked in the family garage at 1247 Maple Street. With the technical knowledge provided by Miller, she deliberately compromised the brake lines, creating a scenario that would potentially result in a serious accident. What Margaret had not fully anticipated were the potential fatal consequences of her actions. Her plan was driven by a misguided maternal instinct, a desperate attempt to protect her daughter from what she perceived as a dangerous relationship. However, the legal and moral implications of her conspiracy would soon become the focal point of an intense criminal investigation that would tear apart the fabric of Sidwell's close-knit community. The case highlighted the dangerous intersection of parental protection, personal vendetta, and criminal manipulation. Margaret Marshall's actions would soon be scrutinized not just as a personal conflict, but as a serious criminal conspiracy with potentially deadly consequences. The events of August 14, 2022, would forever alter the lives of those involved in the Marshall family tragedy. Susan Marshall departed from her family home at 1247 Maple Street, driving her silver 2018 Toyota Camry, anticipating a meeting with Sheriff James Carter. The late summer evening cast long shadows across the rural landscape surrounding Sidwell, creating an ominous backdrop for the impending catastrophe. Sheriff Carter was following Susan at a discreet distance, a practice they had developed to maintain a semblance of discretion given the controversial nature of their relationship. The Pine Creek Road, notorious for its sharp curves and limited visibility, wound through the picturesque Montana countryside, presenting challenging driving conditions even for experienced motorists. At approximately 7:30 p.m., witnesses reported seeing Susan's vehicle suddenly lose control near a section of road locally known as Devil's Elbow, a treacherous curve that had been the site of numerous previous accidents. The Toyota veered suddenly, its trajectory inexplicably shifting from a steady course to a violent trajectory that ended with a thunderous impact against a centuries-old oak tree. James Carter, driving immediately behind Susan, witnessed the entire sequence of events. His professional training kicked in instantly. Within seconds of the collision, he had stopped his patrol vehicle, radioed for emergency services, and rushed to Susan's aid. Eyewitness accounts would later praise Carter's immediate and professional response, noting how he worked methodically to stabilize Susan before the ambulance arrived. Sidwell Emergency Medical Services arrived within 8 minutes, a remarkably quick response time for the rural location. Paramedics found Susan critically injured, with multiple traumatic injuries indicating the severity of the collision. She was immediately intubated and prepared for emergency transport to Sidwell Regional Medical Center. Dr. Elena Petrov, the lead trauma surgeon, would later describe Susan's injuries as catastrophic. The impact had caused severe spinal cord trauma, resulting in permanent paralysis from the waist down. The medical assessment was unequivocal. Susan would never walk again. Her promising college career and future plans fundamentally altered in a single devastating moment. The initial accident investigation, conducted by Montana Highway Patrol Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, began as a standard mechanical failure inquiry. However, the forensic examination conducted by the State Police Forensic Unit revealed something far more sinister. Detective Jane Green, leading the technical investigation, discovered clear evidence of intentional brake line manipulation. Forensic analysis showed precise cutting of the brake lines, indicating deliberate sabotage rather than mechanical failure. The cuts were clean and strategic, positioned to ensure catastrophic brake failure at high speed. This was not an accident, but a calculated attempt to cause serious harm. The investigation quickly expanded beyond a simple traffic accident. The Montana State Police established a dedicated task force to investigate the potential criminal nature of the incident. Sheriff Carter, despite his personal connection to the victim, was temporarily placed on administrative leave to prevent any perception of conflict of interest. Preliminary interviews with Susan's mother, Margaret Marshall, revealed a complex web of family tension. Her initial statements appeared rehearsed and oddly detached, raising immediate suspicions among the investigating officers. Margaret's explanation of the events seemed carefully constructed, lacking the genuine emotional response typically associated with a mother whose daughter had just suffered a life-altering injury. Local mechanic Robert Miller became an early person of interest during the investigation. Witness statements and communication records suggested he had been in close contact with Margaret Marshall in the weeks leading up to the incident. His professional expertise in automotive systems made him a critical figure in understanding how the brake lines could have been compromised. The case had transformed from a tragic accident to a potential attempted murder investigation within days. The small town of Sidwell, accustomed to quiet and predictable rhythms of rural life, found itself at the center of a shocking criminal investigation that would expose deep-seated tensions and dark family secrets. As investigators began piecing together the complex narrative, one thing became increasingly clear. The accident was no mere coincidence, but the result of a carefully orchestrated plan with potentially deadly intentions. The investigation into the attempted murder of Susan Marshall unfolded with meticulous precision, led by Deputy Sheriff Michael Henderson, who assumed command given Sheriff James Carter's forced recusal due to his personal involvement. The Somerset County Sheriff's Department collaborated closely with the Montana State Police to ensure a comprehensive and unbiased investigation. Robert Miller emerged as a critical turning point in the case. Consumed by guilt and increasingly concerned about the potential legal consequences, he voluntarily contacted the authorities on August 18, 2022, 4 days after the incident. During an extensive 8-hour interrogation, Miller provided a detailed account of his involvement in the conspiracy. Miller's testimony revealed the intricate details of his collaboration with Margaret Marshall. He explained that Margaret had approached him with a plan to teach her daughter a lesson, initially presenting it as a minor intervention to disrupt Susan's relationship with Sheriff Carter. Miller, who had known the Marshall family for years, admitted to providing technical guidance on compromising the vehicle's brake system, believing he was helping a desperate mother protect her child. Forensic evidence corroborated Miller's statement. Trace DNA and tool marks found on Susan's vehicle perfectly matched Miller's workshop equipment. Phone records documented multiple communications between Miller and Margaret in the weeks leading up to the incident, providing a clear timeline of their conspiracy. On August 20, 2022, Margaret Marshall was arrested at her workplace, Sidwell Elementary School. The arrest occurred during her lunch break, attracting significant attention from local staff and students. Detective Jane Green led the arrest operation, ensuring a professional and dignified process despite the high-profile nature of the case. During initial interrogations, Margaret presented a complex narrative of maternal protection. She repeatedly emphasized that her intention was never to cause serious harm to Susan. "I just wanted to scare her," Margaret told investigators, her voice trembling. "I wanted to make her understand the danger of her relationship with Carter." Psychological evaluations, conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez, a forensic psychologist brought in by the prosecution, revealed a nuanced profile of Margaret's mental state. The evaluation suggested a combination of factors: extreme protective instincts, unresolved grief from her husband's death, and a deeply ingrained fear of losing her only child. The legal implications were severe. Margaret was charged with multiple felonies, including attempted murder, conspiracy, and aggravated assault. The prosecution, led by Somerset County District Attorney Thomas Green, began building a case that highlighted the premeditated nature of her actions. Robert Miller was also charged, though his cooperation and early confession positioned him as a potential witness for the prosecution. He faced charges of conspiracy and mechanical tampering, with the potential for reduced sentencing due to his willingness to provide full disclosure. Susan Marshall, still recovering in the hospital and now permanently paralyzed, became a key witness. Her statement to investigators was crucial in understanding the full context of the family's dynamics and the events leading to the accident. Sheriff James Carter, though placed on administrative leave, remained closely connected to the investigation. His relationship with Susan became a significant point of discussion, with investigators carefully examining whether any inappropriate dynamics had contributed to Margaret's extreme actions. The trial of Margaret Marshall commenced on November 7, 2022, in the Somerset County Courthouse, transforming the small municipal building into the epicenter of local and national media attention. District Attorney Thomas Green presented a meticulously constructed case that methodically revealed the calculated nature of Margaret's actions against her own daughter. Prosecutors portrayed Margaret as a woman who had crossed an irreparable line in her misguided attempt to protect her child. The evidence was overwhelming. Robert Miller's testimony, forensic analysis of Susan's vehicle, communication records, and Margaret's own conflicting statements during interrogations. Each piece of evidence painted a damning portrait of premeditated criminal intent. Dr. Elizabeth Ramirez's psychological evaluation became a critical component of the prosecution's strategy. Her testimony revealed Margaret's complex psychological state, a mixture of genuine maternal anxiety, unresolved grief from her husband's death, and a dangerous tendency to control her daughter's life choices. The expert argued that Margaret's actions stemmed from a profound fear of loss, transformed into a destructive form of protection. The defense, led by veteran criminal attorney Daniel Harrison, attempted to portray Margaret as a desperate mother, acting out of concern for her daughter's well-being. Harrison argued that Margaret never intended to cause permanent harm, emphasizing her lack of prior criminal record and her years of dedicated service as a school administrator. However, this strategy ultimately failed to overcome the mountain of evidence against her. Susan Marshall's victim impact statement became the most powerful moment of the trial. Delivered from her wheelchair, her testimony was a devastating account of how her mother's actions had permanently destroyed her life plans. "My mother didn't just take my ability to walk," Susan testified, her voice steady and controlled. "She took my future, my dreams, and our relationship." On November 22, 2022, after a 3-week trial and less than 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Margaret Marshall guilty on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, and aggravated assault. The sentencing phase was equally decisive. Judge Rebecca Hartley sentenced Margaret to 15 years in the Montana Women's Prison, with a mandatory minimum of 10 years before potential parole consideration. Robert Miller received a reduced sentence of 5 years, with the possibility of early release after serving 60% of his term, in exchange for his full cooperation with the prosecution. His auto repair shop was permanently closed, and his professional reputation was irreparably damaged. The personal aftermath was equally profound. Susan Marshall's life had been fundamentally altered. Her dreams of completing her business administration degree were drastically modified. She became an advocate for disability rights, using her tragic experience to raise awareness about family violence and the importance of recognizing manipulative behavioral patterns. Sheriff James Carter's life also underwent complete transformation. The relationship with Susan, already strained by the traumatic events, dissolved within months of the trial. Facing significant professional and personal scrutiny, he resigned from his position and left Sidwell, relocating to a small town in Wyoming to start anew. The case had lasting repercussions for the community of Sidwell. The tight-knit town was forced to confront uncomfortable discussions about family dynamics, abuse of power, and the sometimes destructive nature of parental intervention. Local support groups and counseling services saw increased engagement as residents processed the collective trauma of the Marshall family tragedy. Media coverage continued long after the trial, with national news outlets and true crime documentaries exploring the complex psychological dynamics that led a mother to destroy her daughter's life in a misguided attempt at protection. The case became a critical study in extreme parental behavior and the potential consequences of unchecked maternal control.